They hadn't even been deliberating for an hour, and already, something was wrong. A single note from the jury sent the courtroom into quiet chaos. One juror, they claimed, couldn't even follow the judge's instructions, and that was just the beginning. Sean Diddy Combs is facing the most serious accusations of his life: sex trafficking, racketeering, and charges that could lock him away for good. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who used his empire to exploit and control the defense. They say it's all a twisted fantasy, a government overreach into a celebrity's controversial but private life. But now, after weeks of explosive testimony, it's no longer about what's been said in court. It's about what 12 strangers believe behind closed doors. And as soon as deliberations began, cracks started to show. Juror number 25, someone inside that room was allegedly not following the judge's orders. And without unanimous agreement, there can be no conviction. So what's really happening inside that jury room? What made them question one of their own so quickly? And why could this bizarre twist be exactly what Combs needed to walk free? Let's break down what the jury is wrestling with and why things are already getting out of control. It didn't take long for the tension to break through the walls of the jury room. Just 57 minutes into deliberations, the first note appeared. It was short, vague, and deeply unsettling. A juror, they said, might not be able to follow the judge's instructions. That's not a small detail. In a case like this where a man's entire legacy, freedom, and future are on the line, every single juror has to be in sync. The rules are clear. If one person can't focus, doesn't understand the charges, or simply refuses to engage, it could derail everything. But the note didn't explain why this juror was causing concern. There were no specifics, no accusations, just a quiet, cryptic signal that something wasn't right behind closed doors. Judge Aro Subramanian didn't panic. He met privately with both legal teams, Combs' defense and the federal prosecutors. Together, they made a calculated decision. Send the jury back in. No dramatic move, no public scolding, just a simple reminder that they had a duty to deliberate. And that's exactly what the judge told them. Still, behind the judge's calm response was a serious truth. This kind of disruption so early in deliberations is rare. Most jurors spend hours reviewing testimony and rereading evidence before even thinking about contacting the court. So for someone to raise a red flag right out of the gate, that's more than just a misunderstanding. It's a sign of division, possibly even distrust. And what made it even more unsettling, no one, not the court, not the lawyers, not the media knew what exactly was going on with juror number 25. Was it confusion, bias, a refusal to participate? Whatever the issue was, it was already threatening to tear the process apart before it had even truly begun. But this was just the beginning, because the next message from the jury would send the courtroom into a deeper spiral and bring up questions no one was prepared to answer. The moment that note was read in court, one question echoed through the halls. Who exactly is juror number 25? The jury, made up of 8 men and 4 women, had been carefully selected over days of interviews, background checks, and challenges from both legal teams. Every person chosen had passed scrutiny. They were supposed to be neutral, competent, and mentally ready to weigh months of disturbing testimony. And yet, here we were less than an hour into deliberations, and one of them might already be crumbling. Reports say juror number 25 wasn't just any juror. According to courtroom whispers, this individual had a background in science, a PhD, no less. Someone who was expected to be analytical, methodical, and rational. Ironically, exactly the kind of person you'd expect to follow instructions to the letter. But that's what made the situation more confusing and more alarming, because if someone with that kind of academic background was already losing the thread, what did that say about the emotional weight of this case? Could it be that they were overwhelmed by the mountain of testimony, or were they personally conflicted by what they'd heard witnesses describing: violent, drug-fueled parties, secret recordings, federal agents testifying about coded language and hidden operations? Or maybe, just maybe, juror number 25 had already made up their mind and didn't want to hear anything more. It's a dangerous possibility, because under federal rules, a juror can't be removed just for having a strong opinion. But if they refuse to deliberate, if they stop engaging altogether, that's a different story. That opens the door for a replacement, or worse, a mistrial. And here's the thing no one's saying out loud in court. If a mistrial happens now, it could play directly into Diddy's hands. But before anyone could make sense of juror number 25's mindset, the jury sent another note, and this one. It brought drugs into the equation and flipped the entire tone of the trial. When the second note arrived, the courtroom held its breath. It was an explosive knot on the surface, but it confirmed something everyone was starting to suspect. The jury was already struggling. This time the message wasn't about a juror. It was a question, a specific one. Jurors wanted to clarify something about drug distribution. More on that in a moment, but Judge Subramanian had a more pressing issue. Juror number 25 was still under quiet scrutiny. The judge didn't call them out by name. There was no confrontation. Instead, he issued a calm but firm reminder: every juror has a duty to deliberate. They must engage. They must consider the evidence. And most importantly, they must follow his instructions. It was a surgical move, a public warning dressed as a neutral statement, but everyone in the room knew who it was for. Behind the scenes, the legal teams were paying close attention. The prosecution wanted to avoid any cracks that might delay a potential conviction. The defense, they were watching closely for an opportunity, a flaw, a fumble, anything they could use to raise doubt or force a mistrial. And here's where things get more dangerous. If juror number 25 really can't follow instructions, Judge Sup has two options. Neither is simple. He can dismiss the juror and replace them with one of the alternates, risky, but manageable. Or, if things spiral further, he could declare a mistrial, which means starting everything from scratch. And in a case that's already stretched over 2 months, with 34 witnesses and hours of explosive testimony, starting over would be a disaster. Yet behind all the legal chess, one question lingered: was this juror truly confused? Or were they refusing to go along with a verdict they didn't agree with? The difference is everything. Because a confused juror can be replaced, but a defiant one, that could change the outcome of the entire trial. And while that pressure simmered, the jury's drug question opened a new, more dangerous door. Just when things were starting to stabilize, the jury sent another note, but this time, it wasn't about behavior, confusion, or a juror refusing to play ball. It was about drugs. The question was simple on the surface, but it hit right at the heart of the racketeering charges. If someone asks for a controlled substance and another person gives it to them, does that count as distribution? That one sentence sent shockwaves through the courtroom because this wasn't a curiosity, it was strategy. It revealed exactly where the jury's attention had landed on the drug-related element of the case. And that matters a lot. See, drug distribution isn't just a side charge. It's a predicate, one of the building blocks the government needs to prove Combs was running a criminal enterprise. If the jury believes that giving someone drugs even by request counts as distribution, it tightens the noose on the racketeering charge. And if that charge sticks, it opens the door to a potential life sentence. The judge didn't answer immediately. Instead, he told them the court would respond the next day. But that delay, that moment of uncertainty, gave everyone else time to read between the lines. The prosecution, likely feeling good, the jury was asking the right questions, looking at the case through a legal lens the government had laid out. From the start, the defense, probably sweating because if the jurors are already thinking in terms of technical guilt, the emotional arguments about Combs' lifestyle might not be enough. But it wasn't just the content of the question that mattered, it was the timing. This was all happening on day one of deliberations. Most juries don't ask legal hypotheticals like this until much later, after hours of debate, review, and second-guessing. This wasn't a jury just dipping their toes in. They were diving deep, fast, and what came next would only make things messier for the jury. This isn't a simple case of guilty or not guilty. It's 5 separate charges, each tangled with testimony, timelines, and legal definitions, and every single one carries massive weight. Let's break it down. At the center is the most serious accusation: racketeering conspiracy. It's not just about one crime, it's about running an enterprise built on crimes. The government argues that Combs didn't just make bad decisions or party too hard. They say he created a system, a business empire that used drugs, sex, fear, and money to control people. That every yacht party, every closed-door event, every shady wire transfer was part of a calculated machine. Then there's sex trafficking, with witness testimony claiming Combs transported women across state lines, not for music videos or business, but for coercion and exploitation. Some said they were paid, others said they were threatened. All of it, prosecutors say, fits the federal definition of trafficking. A third charge, transportation to engage in prostitution, another layer in the government's argument that what looked like a music empire was actually a front for something darker. Then come the lesser known, but equally powerful, charges tied to drugs, distribution, conspiracy, intent. The jury's recent note about controlled substances wasn't random. It ties directly to the government's claim that drugs were used as tools of control, pushed, and traded within the alleged criminal circle. So when jurors ask about whether giving someone a drug counts as distribution, they're not asking in the abstract. They're trying to understand how deep this goes and whether one illegal moment could chain together with dozens of others to form a criminal empire. And all of this rests on evidence they've been absorbing for weeks. 30 for witnesses, from ex-girlfriends to male escorts to former employees and federal agents. It's not just a question of what happened. It's whether all of these pieces form a picture of a man who weaponized power, or just lived wildly without crossing a legal line. Either way, the jury has a long, heavy road ahead, and the stakes couldn't be higher. While the jury wrestled with the weight of charges and legal definitions, Combs' defense team wasn't sitting quietly in their closing arguments. Defense attorney Mark Agnafilo painted a very different picture. He called the prosecution's case badly exaggerated, suggesting the entire trial was less about crime and more about persecuting a man for his private lifestyle. He argued that the jury was essentially hearing 2 trials at once. One, the fake trial spun by prosecutors, full of accusations and assumptions. The other, the real trial, grounded in what the defense claimed was the truth, that Combs led a complicated, extreme personal life, but one that stayed private and legal. Agnifilo didn't hold back. At times, sarcastic and visibly animated, he attacked the government's evidence as overblown, insisting there was no criminal enterprise, just a misunderstanding of a controversial lifestyle. But the courtroom wasn't completely won over. The prosecution objected frequently, calling some of the defense's claims grossly improper. Judge Subramanian sided with prosecutors on several points, signaling he wasn't going to let the defense's narrative go unchecked. Still, Agnifilo's argument hit a nerve. It forced the jury on the public to consider something bigger than guilt or innocence. Was this a trial about crime, or was it about judgment? And that blurred line added a whole new layer of complexity to what the jury had to decide. With that backdrop, the jurors were left with more than legal questions. They were faced with a moral dilemma. Could they separate the man's lifestyle from the law? Or was the prosecution right to see everything as part of a criminal operation? Their next steps would reveal a lot, not just about Combs, but about the justice system itself, with the judge's instructions still fresh, and the defense and prosecution's final words echoing in their minds. The 12 jurors retreated behind closed doors. Inside that room, the trial entered a new and unpredictable phase. The real trial, the one where 12 strangers decide a man's fate. The jurors faced a monumental task. Months of testimony, dozens of witnesses, thousands of pages of evidence, and the competing stories of both sides, all boiling down to a simple but impossible question. Is Sean Diddy Combs guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Every piece of evidence had to be examined, debated, and weighed. Every claim questioned, and every juror had to wrestle with their own doubts and convictions. But the early notes to the judge hinted at a deeper struggle or friction in the group. Juror number 25's apparent resistance to the judge's instructions wasn't just a procedural hiccup. It was a sign that the verdict might not come easy. Unanimity was required, and if one juror refused to deliberate properly, the entire process could collapse. The jury also showed early focus on the drug charges, revealing their careful, detailed approach. They weren't simply ticking boxes. They were trying to understand complex legal definitions that could seal Combs' fate. Outside, the world waited, watching every development like a high-stakes thriller. For Combs, this was more than a trial. It was a life-altering moment, and for the justice system, it was a test. Could 12 ordinary people, under intense pressure, deliver a fair verdict in one of the most high-profile cases of the decade? As the jury's clock ticked, one thing was clear: the next days would be crucial, unpredictable, and potentially explosive. Because in the jury room, every second counted. The courtroom emptied. But inside the jury room, the tension was just beginning to boil. 12 strangers from different walks of life now faced a monumental responsibility to sift through mountains of evidence and decide whether Sean Diddy Combs was guilty of crimes that could send him to prison for life. No cameras, no public scrutiny, just the quiet, intense pressure of making a decision that would change a life forever. But early signs showed this was anything but straightforward. Reports emerged that one juror, number 25, was struggling to follow the judge's instructions, casting a shadow over the deliberations. It wasn't clear if this was confusion, stubbornness, or a fundamental disagreement with the case itself. This kind of tension can derail the entire process, turning weeks of testimony into a stalemate. At the same time, the jurors were already wrestling with complicated legal questions. Their note about drug distribution wasn't just a technicality, revealed they were digging deep into the government's theory, carefully weighing how individual acts fit into the larger charges. The pressure in that room was enormous. Every word spoken could sway the verdict. Every doubt had to be confronted, and every juror had to find a way to work together, no matter how divided they felt. Outside, the media buzzed, the public speculated, and the world waited. Inside, the real story was unfolding in silence. Juror number 25 quickly became the focal point of the entire deliberation process, and for good reason. The jury's very first note to the judge revealed concerns that this juror might be struggling to follow the court's instructions. But what does that really mean? Is juror 25 confused by the complicated legal jargon? Or are they stubbornly refusing to consider certain evidence? Or worse, have they already made up their mind and refused to deliberate? The answer matters because a single juror who refuses to engage properly can paralyze the entire jury. Legal experts explain that while a juror can't be removed simply for disagreeing or having a firm opinion, refusing to deliberate or ignoring the judge's instructions is a different matter entirely. Judge Sean Subramanian was caught in a difficult spot. He could either dismiss juror 25 and replace them with an alternate, or if things got worse, declare a mistrial and force the whole case to start over. Either choice carries serious consequences. Removing a juror risks alienating the rest of the panel. A mistrial means months of testimony and millions of dollars wasted. For Sean Combs, the drama inside the jury room was becoming almost as critical as the courtroom battles before it. For the public, the question was simple. Would juror 25's resistance sink the prosecution's case, or would it just slow the path to a verdict? One of the most telling moments early in deliberations came when the jury sent a second note to the judge, a question about drug distribution. Specifically, they wanted to know, if a person requests a controlled substance, does the person who gives it to them count as a distributor? This isn't just legal nitpicking. It goes to the heart of the prosecution's argument that drugs weren't incidental in this case. They were tools used to control and manipulate, the government claims. Combs and his alleged co-conspirators didn't just party with drugs, they used them strategically to maintain power, keep people compliant, and silence dissent. Understanding whether simply handing over drugs counts as distribution could significantly impact how jurors view the severity of the alleged crimes. It also shows the jury is engaged, asking precise questions that reveal they're not rushing their verdict. They're digging into the details, trying to connect dots between evidence and charges. That kind of focused inquiry often signals a careful, methodical approach, but it can also mean disagreements are simmering beneath the surface. The judge promised a clear response the next day, but until then, the jurors were left to wrestle with the complexities alone. As the drug question lingered, the pressure mounted not just on the jury, but on everyone watching, waiting for a verdict that could shock the music world and beyond. As deliberations unfolded, the defense's closing arguments echoed loudly in the jury's minds. Mark Agnifilo, Combs' lead attorney, didn't just deny the charges. He aimed to reshape the entire story. He argued the prosecution's case was badly exaggerated, a witch hunt targeting Combs for living a lifestyle many might find controversial, but certainly not criminal. Instead of fighting isolated charges, the defense pushed the idea that this trial was about judgment, about punishing Combs for what they called a swinger's lifestyle. Agnifilo challenged the jury to separate facts from assumptions. Was this really a criminal enterprise, or a complicated personal life blown out of proportion? His tone was sometimes sarcastic, almost daring the jury to question the government's narrative, but his attacks weren't without pushback. Prosecutors objected frequently, accusing the defense of making grossly improper claims. Judge Subramanian sided with the prosecution on multiple occasions, making it clear that the courtroom wasn't a place for theatrics. Still, the defense's approach succeeded in planting seeds of doubt. It forced the jury to grapple not just with the evidence, but with their own perceptions and the question of where private life ends and criminality begins. That blurred line was at the heart of this case and a challenge the jury would carry into every discussion behind closed doors. Over nearly 2 months, the courtroom heard from 34 witnesses, each adding a layer to a story both complex and explosive. Ex-girlfriends recounted intimate moments, shadowed by allegations of manipulation and control. Former employees painted pictures of a business empire, shadowed by rumors of exploitation. Male escorts stepped forward with claims that went beyond typical industry stories, offering glimpses into a world few understand. Federal agents laid out the law, connecting dots that built the prosecution's case piece by piece. Every witness carried weight. Some were credible, others less so. Some stories seemed to align, others conflicted. For the jury, parsing truth from exaggeration wasn't easy. Each testimony introduced fresh questions. Were these accounts accurate or tainted by bias? Were they evidence of a criminal enterprise or isolated incidents? As the jury deliberated, these voices echoed in their minds, compelling them to decide not just what happened, but how to interpret the tangled mess of human behavior and law. This trial wasn't just about one man. It was about stories, power, and how the law confronts the darkest corners of celebrity. For Sean Diddy Combs, the stakes couldn't be higher. Facing charges like sex trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy, and transportation to engage in prostitution, a guilty verdict on the most serious counts could mean life behind bars. This isn't just a legal battle, it's a fight for his entire legacy, from hip-hop mogul to cultural icon. Combs built an empire that transcended music, but this trial has cast a long shadow over everything he's achieved. A conviction would reshape how history remembers him, no longer just a pioneering artist and entrepreneur, but a man accused of crimes that strike at the heart of justice. Yet, even beyond the courtroom, the ripple effects are immense. Public opinion, media narratives, and industry relationships all hang in the balance, awaiting the jury's decision. For Combs and those close to him, the waiting game is agonizing because the verdict isn't just about freedom, it's about identity, reputation, and the future of a man who's been larger than life for decades. As hours turned into days, the jury's struggle became palpable. Weight of their decision pressed down harder with every passing moment. Juror 25's resistance lingered as a wild card, threatening to stall the process or spark deeper divisions. Questions about drug distribution underscored how tangled the case had become. No easy answers, no simple verdict. Behind closed doors, debates grew heated. Some jurors pushed for conviction, convinced by the evidence and testimonies. Others hesitated, wrestling with doubts stirred by the defense's attacks and the complex nature of the allegations. The need for unanimity added relentless pressure. Each juror's vote carried immense weight. Every discussion was a delicate balance of fact, emotion, and legal standards. Outside, the world waited with bated breath. Knowing this wasn't just a trial, it was a defining moment with repercussions far beyond the courtroom. As the jury's clock ticked, the question remained: would they find common ground or fracture under the strain? The jury returned after a tense overnight break, stepping back into the small room where their decision would make history. Each moment felt heavier than the last, as they grappled with evidence and testimony that had stretched on for nearly 2 months. With the judge's clarifications in hand, they faced a crucial question: could they reach a unanimous verdict? Tensions inside were high, disagreements simmered, alliances shifted, and the weight of the moment became undeniable for Sean Diddy Combs. These final hours represented the culmination of a journey from superstar to defendant for the jurors. It was the ultimate test of their responsibility to balance doubt, evidence, and the law with fairness. Outside the courtroom, the world held its breath, waiting for a verdict that could shock, surprise, or confirm long-held beliefs. The countdown to justice was on, and no one could predict how it would end. Early into their deliberations, the jury sent not one but 2 notes to the judge, a rare move that instantly grabbed attention. The first note raised concerns about Juror 25's ability to follow instructions, hinting at friction within the group. The second questioned the legal definition of drug distribution, an intricate detail that goes right to the heart of the prosecution's claims. These notes weren't just procedural, they exposed the deep divisions simmering beneath the surface. Legal experts point out that such early communication often signals a jury wrestling with complicated evidence, and sometimes a jury struggling to reach consensus. The concern over Juror 25 suggests this person's views were significant enough to cause real unease, while the drug question shows others were probing the fine print of the law, searching for clarity. Together, these notes paint a picture of a jury caught between doubt and determination, navigating a trial as complex as it is high stakes. The question hanging in the air: could they bridge these divides before it was too late? When the jury sent that first note raising concerns about Juror 25, Judge Arun Subramanian faced a critical choice. The law gives judges 2 main options in situations like this: dismiss the juror and bring in an alternate, or declare a mistrial and start the entire case over. Neither option is simple. Removing a juror risks alienating the remaining panel members and potentially undermining the integrity of the verdict. On the other hand, declaring a mistrial means months of grueling testimony and millions of dollars spent could be for nothing. Judge Subramanian took a careful approach, urging the jury to continue deliberations and reminding them of their duty to weigh all evidence thoroughly. He balanced firmness with patience, understanding the gravity of the trial and the lives hanging in the balance. His decisions highlighted the immense pressure on the courtroom's highest authority to ensure justice while preserving fairness. Every step he took rippled through the trial, influencing both legal strategy and public perception. As the jury wrestled with their verdict, the judge's steady hand remained a crucial factor in how the case unfolded. As the trial neared its end, the defense doubled down on one clear goal: plant enough doubt to avoid conviction. Mark Agnafilo's closing arguments didn't just challenge the prosecution's evidence. They aimed to distract the jury from seeing Combs as a criminal. Calling the case a fake trial, Agnafilo painted the accusations as an overreach, a pursuit driven more by politics and spectacle than facts. He highlighted inconsistencies, questioned motives, and framed Combs' private life as misunderstood rather than illegal. His tone was sharp, even sarcastic at times, daring jurors to separate sensational headlines from the actual courtroom record. This wasn't just a legal defense, it was a battle for narrative control, a fight to keep Combs' reputation intact. Whether this strategy worked would ultimately rest in the jurors' hands, as they sifted through weeks of testimony and complex legal arguments. In the end, the defense's hope was simple: if they could sow enough doubt, Combs could walk free. The prosecution's closing arguments were a direct contrast to the defense's attempts at distraction. They painted a clear, relentless picture: Sean Diddy Combs at the center of a criminal enterprise that exploited vulnerable women. Prosecutors emphasized the web of evidence gathered over weeks, pointing to testimonies from victims, employees, and experts who connected the dots. Their narrative focused on patterns of control, coercion, and abuse hidden behind Combs' glamorous public image. Each piece of testimony was framed not as isolated incidents, but as part of a broader conspiracy, a racketeering scheme driven by greed and power. The government reminded jurors that the law demands accountability, no matter a person's fame or influence. With passion and precision, they urged the jury to look beyond doubts and consider the full scope of the evidence. For prosecutors, this was more than just a case. It was a chance to send a message that no one is above the law. As the jury weighed their verdict, the prosecution's forceful arguments echoed as a powerful call for justice. From day one, the trial was never just about the courtroom. Media outlets across the world zeroed in, dissecting every testimony, every note from the jury, every twist and turn. Social media buzzed with speculation, some supportive, others highly critical. This non-stop spotlight added pressure not just on the jury, but on everyone involved. For Combs, public opinion became a battleground where his reputation was contested as fiercely as in court. The defense accused the prosecution of creating a spectacle, but the media frenzy only amplified the trial's intensity. Fans, critics, and casual observers debated endlessly, turning the case into a cultural event. While jurors were instructed to avoid outside influence, it was impossible to ignore the ripple effect of headlines and online discussions. This trial underscored a modern reality. High-profile cases don't just unfold in court, they play out in the court of public opinion, and that court can be just as unpredictable and influential. After days of intense deliberation, the jury's decision finally came, whether guilty or not guilty. The verdict would send shockwaves far beyond the courtroom walls. For Sean Diddy Combs, the outcome would define the rest of his life, either cementing a legacy forever altered, or offering a chance at redemption. But the story doesn't end with the verdict. Appeals, public debates, and the court of social opinion would continue long after the gavel fell. Questions would linger. What does this mean for victims seeking justice? How will this reshape conversations about power and accountability in entertainment? For the public, the trial became more than a legal case, was a mirror reflecting society's struggles with fame, justice, and truth. No matter the outcome, one thing is clear: the ripple effects of this trial will be felt for years to come, and as the dust settles, the world will be watching what happens next. If you're following this story as closely as we are, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. And drop your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think the jury will decide?